Hello everyone! Well, elections are coming, and with that, another edition of New Narrative Citizens Agenda, our handbook to understanding the most important issues facing Singapore. Launching Friday, April 25th at 7 p.m. at the projector, link to get a copy and a ticket in the description below. More on that later, but first, an update on the People's Office for More Accurate Education, or POFMA'ed. In our previous episode, we argued that POFMA'ed is actually a free fact-checking service for the Singapore public. We made a series of statements regarding Ho Ching's salary in 2020 and challenged the PAP government to POFMA us. And guess what? It worked! The PAP government did not POFMA us. We can therefore conclude that all the statements we made in episode 2 were true. This means that this is true. It is a fact that in 2020, the annual salary of Temasek CEO Ho Ching was more than 100 million Singapore dollars a year. Feel free to repeat that fact everywhere. Second, we would like to congratulate the POFMA League champion of 2024. When we checked in August, the leader was Kenneth Jayaratnam with 3 POFMA instances. But a late surge up the table sees the Transformative Justice Collective win the 2024 POFMA League with 4 POFMAs all gathered at the end of the year. I presented Kokila of TJC with their trophy when I was in Singapore last month. Meanwhile, New Narrative still has no POFMAs. When I predicted we'd be like Manchester United, I thought it meant we'd surge up the table. Instead, we suck. Oh, why is my football team so bad? But hope springs eternal. So here is another statement sent in by one of our viewers for the PAP government to fact check. In Parliament, PSP MP Leong Man Wai has twice asked Minister for Foreign Affairs Vivian Balakrishnan about Singapore's arms sales to Israel and the use of Singapore arms in Gaza. Both times, Vivian sidestepped the question by replying that Singapore strictly complies with international obligations regarding arms sales and adheres to UN sanctions and embargoes, but refused to disclose specifics citing national security. The problem, of course, is that there is no embargo on arms sales to Israel, so his answer is pointless. So we invite the PAP government to POFMA the following 2 statements. First, it is a fact that Singapore continues to engage in the arms trade with Israel. And second, it is a fact that Singaporean-made arms have been used by Israel against Palestinians in Gaza since the current conflict started in October 2023. I really hope the PAP government POFMAs those statements. This is the show with PJ Thum. Hello everyone and welcome back to the show with PJ Thum. In May and June 2024, New Narrative surveyed over 1,000 Singaporeans twice about what the most important issues facing Singapore are. And Singaporeans responded very clearly. Life in Singapore is too expensive and stressful. We have a cost of living crisis. As with our previous Citizens Agenda surveys, we have published articles breaking down these issues. In this and following episodes of the show, I'm going to try to help everyone understand the basic challenges that we face. In today's episode, I'll be setting up the general outline of the problem facing Singapore. In subsequent episodes, I'll talk about how that affects cost of living, housing, healthcare, and social policy. But of course, there's only so much I can say in these videos, so if you really want to go in-depth into the issues, please do read the articles, which are all at newnarrative.com/citizensagenda-sg and also published in our book. Link to all that in the description below. I know it can seem really intimidating to understand all this history, so I want to give you a very simple framework to understand Singapore under the PAP. In order to understand 95% of Singapore's history under the PAP, we just need to ask two simple questions that the PAP asks themselves. First, how do we, the PAP, keep the economy of Singapore growing? And second, how do we, the PAP, keep ourselves in power? Basically, every PAP policy is directed towards both these aims, and if it doesn't fulfill both these aims, they usually don't do it. But what happens if the right policy cannot fulfill both aims? That's what's happened to our economy. In 1972, Dr. Goh Keng Swee gave a speech predicting that our current problems would happen. And he actually knew Lee Kuan Yew wouldn't like what he had to say, so he went off to the then University of Singapore and had to start his speech with, "The views I am expressing here are my own personal views and not necessarily those of the PAP government. I have not consulted my colleagues or cleared the text with them as I should if I were to speak as their representative." Which is the political equivalent of texting your crush, "I love you," and then they text back, "I think we should just be friends." And then you text back, "Haha, JK, LOL." But the problem is still there. And the PAP are still aware of the problem, but they have not been able to implement Dr. Goh's solution. Why? Because the optimal solution cannot answer both of the questions. Let's start from the very beginning. We can basically break down Singapore's history under the PAP into two major periods with an interregnum in between. From 1965 to 1978, the socialist period. From 1979 to 1985, the Second Industrial Revolution. And from 1986 to present, the neoliberal period. During the socialist period, the answer to the two questions was pretty straightforward. I've explained this in detail in a previous video, so here's a very brief summary. Singapore's too small. We don't have a sufficient domestic market nor significant resources to exploit. Sir Stamford Raffles forced the Sultan of Johor to sign the island away because of our location, not because of our natural resources. But this means we need capital and trade flowing through Singapore for it to continue to grow. But capital and trade come from elsewhere because Singapore's too small on its own. So we have to run the port and later the country to cater to foreign capital. Now, of course, the old guard of the PAP knew this. This is one major reason why they sought the reunification of Singapore with the rest of Malaya to create Malaysia. Singapore was and still is Malaya's biggest city and most important port, and Malaysia is our most important market. Now, Malaysia, of course, failed for many reasons, which I've talked about elsewhere, but it left us without a significant domestic market. So from 1965, we returned to our historic role catering to foreign capital. We said to foreign capitalists, "Come to Singapore, we can guarantee you good profits because most of our population are used to low wages, and we can even bring in more cheap foreign labor from around the region. That's your coolies, your Samsui women. Everyone is happy to be paid less than you would pay your own workers in the West, but you get the same return, so more profits." Economics 101, we're cheaper, so capitalists came here and made more profits than back home, and then we incentivized more foreign capitalists to come and invest. And as long as our economy kept growing and living standards kept rising, the PAP would keep winning and retaining power, thus answering both questions with the same answer. But Dr. Goh understood that we cannot rely on foreign capital and cheap labor forever. So in that 1972 speech, he identified three problems. First, if we keep relying on foreign capital, then we lose control of our own economy. He said, should something go badly wrong with world trade, the rapid growth we have been enjoying in recent years can come to a grinding stop. Foreign capitalists can threaten to withdraw investment, or maybe some crazy orange nutjob slaps us with tariffs even though Singapore has a trade deficit with its country. So, if we are dependent on foreign investment, then we do not have control over our own future and we end up having to do whatever foreign capitalists want just to keep the money coming in. Second, if we keep bringing in foreign labor, then eventually we run out of space. No matter how much land you reclaim, eventually you'll run out of land. Dr. Goh said, Because of our limited land area, industrial expansion together with the concomitant population expansion will produce overcrowding to increasingly uncomfortable limits. Finally, a heavy dependence on foreign investment and low-cost labor will also see the majority of profits being collected by foreign companies as the wages of Singaporeans are squeezed, leading to massive income inequality. If you know anything about Singapore today, you see the problem, right? It's the exact problems we face today. Overdependence on foreign investment, overcrowding, inequality, wages being squeezed even as GDP grows ever higher. Dr. Goh foresaw all of this in 1972. And as he predicted, by the end of the 1970s, Singapore's incomes and living standards indeed reached the equivalent of the developed world. We were no longer cheap. Capitalists could no longer make easy profits, but we remain heavily dependent on foreign investment. So question 1, how do you keep the economy growing? Dr. Goh argued that we need to develop indigenous entrepreneurship, management, scientific, and engineering skills. To put it simply, we need to stop relying on foreign funding and generate the capital that keeps our economy flowing domestically. But because our population is small, it has to be high value added, high productivity, high skilled products that we can sell elsewhere because we don't have a huge domestic market to keep generating demand. The problem arose in that Dr. Goh's answer to how do we keep the economy growing went against the answer to how do we keep the PAP in power. You see, any economic transformation entails significant pain. A lot of people who depend on the status quo will lose jobs. A lot of companies will go bust. But the Singapore government has significant reserves and can mitigate the pain if they are brave enough to change course. The bigger problem is, are they willing to change course? Because in order to encourage entrepreneurship, the PAP must give up its control over society. As I discussed in Season 1, Episode 4, the PAP has an insane level of control over society. So through all these mechanisms, the PAP government is able to control or influence or constrain where you live, who you marry, how many children you have, where those children go to school, what kind of healthcare you receive, how much you pay for that healthcare, how much you pay for your house, how much you pay in taxes, and of course, whether or not to grant you the endless series of permits that you need to go about life in Singapore. But if you want genuine entrepreneurship, you have to give up control, because entrepreneurship is by definition rule breaking. You have to accept chaos and you have to accept failure. According to Forbes, 90% of startups fail within 3 years. A Harvard Business School report noted that 2/3 of startups fail to deliver a positive return to investors. But if you know anything about the PAP, you know they cannot accept a loss of control. They cannot accept chaos, they cannot accept failure. Lee Kuan Yew would not accept the scenario in which his party's grip on power was threatened. And Dr. Goh knew this, hence his whole, I'm just saying one, you don't have to listen, I just tell you first, routine. So in response to the problem envisioned by Dr. Goh, Lee Kuan Yew tried a different path of Singapore where they tightened control over Singapore to force Singapore to become entrepreneurial. They sought to transform Singapore's economy into high-tech, high-value-added manufacturing. This was the second industrial revolution, and it was a massive failure. Now, the problem, as I've talked about in Season 1, Episode 6, was that they tried to unilaterally legislate this into being, including forcing employers to raise wages and tightening control over Singapore. Without the profitability, foreign capital simply left. By 1985, GDP growth plummeted by 10% in a year, labour costs had risen by 40% since 1980, there was hardly any technological upgrading, a 40% decline in investment and collapsing demand for Singapore's manufactured goods. Basically, the PAP said, "You're fired," and foreign capital said, "You can't fire me, I quit." In the wake of this failure, Dr. Goh Keng Swee retired, and the second generation of PAP leaders led by Goh Chok Tong chose to double down on the economic model, which led us to the problems we face today. That's the second major era of Singapore, the neoliberal era from 1986 onwards. They doubled down in two ways. The first, they reasoned, if capitalism is so powerful, let's make all Singaporeans capitalists. So while they suppress our wages so that capitalists can retain profitability, they also tried to convert Singaporeans to capitalists by allowing us to use our CPF to invest, but only into improved GLCs, while also inflating the value of our property, especially our HDB flats, so shifting the basis of prosperity in Singapore from wage income to total wealth, such as property, stocks, bonds, and so on. The problem, of course, is that being rich on paper doesn't mean anything if you can't actually spend the money. That is why we say Singaporeans are cash poor and asset rich. But more importantly, they turn the government into a capitalist itself so it can invest our reserves and gain the profits for Singapore and theoretically redistribute the profits to Singaporeans. But this means it also profits from the exploitation of Singaporeans. And this has become a serious conflict of interest, especially when we can't vote them out. Again, I'll talk more about this in the next episode. Second, rather than make Singapore competitive based on innovation, they went the other way and sought to make Singapore competitive by cutting costs as much as possible, by making Singapore as boringly stable and predictable as possible. We focus on certainty and stability, which is the opposite of innovation and progress. We cannot progress because progress is, by definition, change. So they minimize progress as much as possible. And they use the ideology of neoliberalism to justify all this and make Singaporeans work more and work harder for the same money by tying economic outcomes to every aspect of our lives via the myth of meritocracy. That's why we're so elitist and we have streaming and high-stakes testing and why Lee Kuan Yew went nuts about eugenics and graduate mothers. It's all meant to make our entire society as efficient as possible. This was not Dr. Goh Keng Swee's proposed solution, but it satisfied both questions. From the PAP's perspective, the benefit of stability, of anti-entrepreneurship as our competitive advantage is that it grows the economy while also keeping the PAP in power. But you see the problem. Dr. Goh believes our solution is indigenous entrepreneurism. Instead, we have sought to preserve our competitiveness by killing off every single bit of instinct towards entrepreneurism. But there's only so much fat you can trim before you're cutting into bone. So that's the very big picture. Of course, again, there's a lot of nuance and contradictions, and I encourage you to read the work of economists such as Linda Lim and Pang Eng Fong, and other academics like Donald Low, Teo Yu Yan, and so on, to get a more nuanced picture. But the sad thing is that because we doubled down on the same economic model, Dr. Goh Keng Swee's disaster scenario has come to pass, and the PAP know it. They have known it for a very long time. Dr. Goh raised it in 1972, the PAP tried to address it starting in 1978, and they have repeatedly identified the problem in successive reports. The 2010 Economic Strategies Committee report, the 2013 Our Singapore Conversation report, this 2016 NUS LKY School report, or the 2022 Forward SG report. All of them argue that we must reduce our dependence on foreign capital and labour by increasing productivity and having more indigenous entrepreneurialism. But instead, we see a repeated pattern where the same problem is identified, the same answer proposed, and then no action taken, or the problem becomes even worse. So take, for example, the problem of having too many foreign workers leading to overcrowding in Singapore and wage suppression. The proportion of foreign non-resident workers in Singapore's labour force doubled from 3.2% in 1970 to 7.4% in 1980. In response, in 1979, then Minister for Trade and Industry Goh Chok Tong launched wage shock therapy. He said, low-wage labour helps to sustain low-skilled, low-productivity and labour-intensive industries. These industries in turn can afford to pay only low wages, which in turn cause them to depend on more imported labour to keep their wage costs down. And then as Prime Minister, Goh Chok Tong opened the floodgates to foreign labour. It more than doubled to 16.1% in 1990 and then rose to 28.1% in 2000. To his credit, Goh towards the end of his term did try to bring it down. But then in 2004, Lee Hsien Loong became Prime Minister and the numbers skyrocketed again. Between 2004 and 2008, the number of foreign workers in Singapore went from just over 600,000 to 1.05 million. That's the blue line on the chart. So in 2008, PM Lee Hsien Loong said,
"We already have almost 1 million foreign workers here, foreigners working here, and we can't imagine simply expanding year after year and one day having 2 million foreigners working in Singapore. We just don't have the space for them."
Like his predecessors, he emphasized limiting the number of foreign workers and improving productivity.
I think we don't have enough Serangoon gardens. And therefore, we have to manage the numbers and put emphasis on upgrading and enhancing their productivity to do better with the numbers we have and not just simply expand and enlarge through more headcount.
So what happened? Yes, after a dip in 2008 to 2009, the number of foreign workers, especially low-wage foreign workers, kept rising. That's the red line on the chart. In 2010, the Economic Strategies Committee report declared we must restructure the economy to reduce dependence on low-skilled, low-wage foreign workers in favor of greater reliance on productivity increases to drive growth. Accordingly, by 2013, there were 100,000 more low-wage foreign workers than in 2010. The same year, then Minister for Finance Tharman Shanmugaratnam repeated Dr. Goh Keng Swee's argument in his budget statement.
The basic reality is that these sectors, which are the most dependent on foreign workers, are also the ones which are furthest behind international standards of productivity and which account for the lag in productivity in our overall economy.
Naturally, by 2015, low-wage foreign labour numbers had fallen. No, I'm kidding. It rose to an all-time high. So ahead of the 2015 election, then PM Lee Hsien Loong promised to bring the numbers down, and to his credit, it fell to 848,000 in 2020, but then the 2020 general election happened, COVID happened, the government desperately wanted economic growth, and the easiest way to have more economic growth is to stuff Singapore full of cheap and exploitable low-wage foreign labour that we can underpay. So by December 2024, the number has risen again to an all-time high of 1.1659 million. I think the PAP have given up because in the 2022 Forward Singapore report, unlike previous reports, the report no longer says reduce foreign worker numbers. It's been watered down to we will ensure that the foreign workforce remains complementary to Singaporeans by continually managing the flow and caliber of foreign employees. Worse, the PAP now manages the problem by telling us not to be xenophobic.
Therefore, we must manage the inflow and integration of new arrivals with the utmost sensitivity and caution to ensure that the flows are balanced and sustainable. But we must also stand firmly against nativism and xenophobia and welcome the new arrivals to become part of our extended family.
Mr. Lee, that's not what you and your party said in 1972, 1979, 2000, 2008 or 2015. But the point is, no one is saying that we don't welcome foreigners or foreign workers. What we are saying is that we need to stop exploiting low-wage foreign labour. We need to stop underpaying low-wage foreign labour. And you, the PAP government, need to stop cramming Singapore full of people when we are already too crowded, because that disincentivizes us improving our economy, improving our productivity, and building a solid and sustainable future for our economy. The PAP government's like a drug addict. It is addicted to exploiting cheap labour. And they have repeatedly sworn they will get clean and get off the drugs, but it's too tempting to just go back to those drugs and keep bringing them in. If only the Singapore government held itself to the same standards it holds drug smugglers and addicts. Okay, so that's our show. In the next episode, I'll explain how all of this affects our cost of living. See you next time. Hello everyone. Grouchy the Malayan Sun Bear here with a big thank you to all our members who've supported us so loyally all these years. The work we do takes up so much time and money, and we're a very small team working tirelessly across Southeast Asia, and we're so grateful for your support. New Narrative is a movement to democratize democracy in Southeast Asia, and it's supported by its members, people like you. So we need your help to keep fighting. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please do join New Narrative as a member or donate to New Narrative. If you become a member, you gain access to our website with all our wonderful articles and videos and comics and podcasts. And you can also interact with other like-minded people who are fighting for a better Southeast Asia, including all our team members, and have wonderful conversations about important issues in a constructive way. So, please consider becoming a member. It's as low as $5 a month, or donate to New Narrative at newnarrative.com/donate. Please like and subscribe to this video, and please share. Thank you very much.